The Forgotten Manuscript. In the heart of Paris, nestled between two towering bookshops, stood an ancient library that time seemed to have forgotten. The wooden doors creaked whenever someone dared to enter, and the scent of old paper and ink wafted through the air like a ghost of centuries past. Inside, dim golden lights barely illuminated the countless bookshelves stretching up to the arched ceiling. Julien Moreau, a young literature professor, had often visited this library, searching for rare texts and forgotten tales. It was his secret refuge from the fast-paced world outside. One evening, as rain pattered against the stained glass windows, he wandered deeper into the maze of shelves than he ever had before. His fingers traced the cracked leather spines of books untouched for decades, maybe centuries. Then, something caught his eye, a book without a title, its cover worn but strangely pristine compared to the others. He pulled it out carefully, dust flying into the dim light. As he turned the pages, he realized it was an unfinished manuscript. The elegant script spoke of love, war, and betrayal, its words full of longing and sorrow. But what fascinated him most was the author's name, Clémentine Rousseau. Julien's heart pounded. Clémentine Rousseau had been a renowned novelist in the 19th century, but she had mysteriously vanished before completing her last novel. Scholars believed the manuscript had been lost forever. And here it was, resting in his hands. Unable to contain his excitement, Julien brought the manuscript to the library's curator, an elderly man named Monsieur Lefebvre. The old man's eyes widened as he examined the book. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. "This is impossible." Determined to uncover the truth, Julien spent days studying the manuscript, comparing it with Rousseau's previous works. The handwriting, the themes, even the unique way she described emotions, it was undeniably hers. But why had it been hidden here for so long? Who had placed it among the forgotten shelves? Julien's research led him to Clementine's last known residence, an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. Dust and cobwebs veiled the remnants of a past life. In a locked drawer of an old desk, he found a bundle of letters addressed to someone named Etienne. The letters spoke of a forbidden love, of secrets kept from the world. And one letter, written just before her disappearance, mentioned hiding her unfinished novel where only a true lover of words would find it. Julien realized with a shiver that Clémentine had hidden her own manuscript, waiting for someone who truly understood literature to uncover it. But why? And who was Etienne? Digging further, he found records of a certain Etienne Dubois, a poet whose work had been overshadowed by Rousseau's fame. Rumors suggested they had been rivals, others claimed they were lovers. But one thing was clear: when Rousseau vanished, Dubois withdrew from the literary world entirely. Determined to find answers, Julien sought out Dubois' last living descendant, an elderly woman named Madame Claire Dubois. When he mentioned the manuscript, her aged hands trembled. "My great-grandfather spoke of Clémentine often," she said. "They were in love, but society wouldn't allow it. A woman of her stature, a man of humble origins, it was scandalous." She handed Julien a dusty journal. It contained Dubois' private writings, his anguish over losing Clémentine, his belief that she had been taken from him, perhaps even silenced by those who disapproved of their love. Julien felt the weight of history pressing upon him. Clémentine had hidden her manuscript, not just to preserve her work, but as a final message to Etienne, a story only he would understand. But he had never found it. Until now. With the library's permission, Julien arranged for the manuscript's publication. It became an instant literary sensation, not just for its beautiful prose but for the tragic love story behind it. Clémentine and Etienne's tale, once buried in dust and forgotten pages, now lived on, immortalized in the words she had left behind. And so, the library that time had nearly forgotten became the place where history was rewritten. Where love, loss, and literature intertwined to tell a story that had waited over a century to be heard. The Eternal Quill. In the quiet town of Whitmore, where cobblestone streets whispered with history, there stood an enigmatic bookstore named the Eternal Quill. Unlike any other shop, its collection was said to contain books that never existed in recorded history, novels with no known authors, stories that seemed to have written themselves. Eleanor Reed, a passionate literature student, had often wandered into its dimly lit aisles, marveling at the strange tomes. One evening, as the town's clock tower chimed midnight, she stumbled upon a book titled The Last Letter. The pages bore an uncanny resemblance to her own handwriting. Perplexed, Eleanor flipped through the yellowed pages. The story was eerily familiar. It was the novel she had been dreaming of writing but had never begun. Every plot twist, every character, every emotion she had imagined lay before her, written in perfect prose. Determined to uncover the truth, Eleanor sought the shopkeeper, an elderly man named Mr. Hawthorne. He peered over his spectacles and smiled knowingly. "Ah, the bookstore chooses its writers," he murmured. "Some stories are meant to find their authors, not the other way around." Eleanor's world tilted. Was this magic? A trick of the mind? Mr. Hawthorne explained that the eternal quill housed stories waiting for their rightful creators. Those with a true literary soul could find their own unwritten works hidden among the shelves. Fascinated yet bewildered, Eleanor took the last letter home. Each word resonated with her, yet she was troubled. The final pages were blank. The ending remained unwritten. The book was waiting for her. For days, she wrestled with the responsibility of finishing the tale. But as her pen touched the page, she felt an unseen force guiding her hand. The story unfolded as though it had always existed, merely waiting to be transcribed. When she returned to the eternal quill, book in hand, Mr. Hawthorne nodded approvingly. "It is complete," he said. As Eleanor placed the last letter back on the shelf, the cover shimmered, and her name appeared beneath the title. Years later, Eleanor became a celebrated author, her books beloved worldwide. Yet she never spoke of the eternal quill. Some mysteries, she realized, were best left between the pages of a book waiting for the right hands to bring them to life. The Lost Chapter. In the city of Verona, where the echoes of Shakespeare's lovers still lingered, there was a grand but forgotten library known as the Biblioteca dell'Oblio, the Library of Oblivion. Within its dust-covered halls lay books long abandoned, stories erased from history, and manuscripts that had mysteriously vanished from the literary world. Isabella Fontana, a dedicated historian, had spent years chasing legends of lost literature. One evening, following a lead from an old diary, she uncovered a hidden passage behind a collapsed bookshelf. There, in the dim candlelight, she found an ancient tome bound in deep crimson leather. Its title, Il Capitolo Perduto, the Lost Chapter. Her heart pounded as she turned its delicate pages. To her astonishment, it was an unknown addition to Romeo and Juliet, a chapter that had never been published. The words spoke of a different fate, where Juliet, upon waking, discovered a secret letter from Romeo, leading to an ending never told. Was this Shakespeare's own writing? If so, why had it been concealed? Isabella took the manuscript to Professor Lorenzo Bellini, a renowned Shakespearean scholar. His fingers trembled as he examined the text. The handwriting, the language. If this is authentic, it will change everything we know about Shakespeare's masterpiece, he whispered. Word of the discovery spread, igniting fierce debate among scholars and historians. Some hailed it as a literary revolution, others dismissed it as an elaborate hoax. But Isabella was certain this was no forgery. As she delved deeper, she found records of a 16th-century playwright, Marco Verdi, who had once been accused of stealing works from the bard himself. Had Verdi taken Shakespeare's original chapter and hidden it away? Or had he been entrusted with a secret even history had forgotten? Despite the controversy, Isabella knew one thing: literature was not just about what was remembered, but also what was lost. Il Capitolo Perduto had spent centuries in the shadows, waiting for someone to give it a voice once more. With great care, she worked to restore the manuscript and ensure its place in history. And though debates raged on, one truth remained undeniable hidden within forgotten pages: the past still whispered its secrets, longing to be heard. The unwritten story of the lost library? In the heart of a bustling city, hidden amidst the towering skyscrapers and neon lights, lay a small, ancient building that many had forgotten about. It was a library, though not just any library. This library had a secret, one that few knew and even fewer understood. Its name, though obscured by time, was the Library of Forgotten Words. The story of how it came to be and why it was hidden away had long been lost in the annals of history, but those who stumbled upon it were forever changed. The library's origins could be traced back centuries to a time when books were cherished more than gold. Its collection was said to contain not just the works of famous authors, but also the forgotten stories and unwritten dreams of countless souls. Each book was a living testament to a world of possibilities, stories that never had the chance to be told, ideas that never saw the light of day, and characters that only existed in the imaginations of their creators. Yet, despite the wonders contained within its walls, the library was forgotten as the world around it evolved, and the thirst for quick information overshadowed the beauty of slow, deliberate storytelling. That is until a young woman named Ilora stumbled upon it one rainy evening. Ilora had always been an avid reader, her passion for literature a refuge from the chaos of everyday life. She had spent countless hours devouring novels, poetry, and plays, yet nothing seemed to quench her thirst for something deeper, something more meaningful. One fateful evening, while wandering through the city streets, she noticed a narrow alley that seemed to beckon her with a strange, magnetic pull. Curious, she walked down the alley and came across a forgotten door, partially hidden by ivy and shadows. Without quite knowing why, Ilora pushed the door open. It creaked on its hinges, revealing a dimly lit room filled with rows of dusty bookshelves. As she stepped inside, the musty smell of aged paper and leather filled her nostrils. The air felt thick with a kind of reverence, as though the library itself was waiting for her arrival. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, each one uniquely crafted and decorated with symbols she didn't recognize. As she ventured deeper into the library, she found that the books didn't have titles. Instead, they had intricate designs etched into their covers, almost as if they were alive, breathing with stories. Some seemed to whisper faintly, while others hummed with a quiet energy. The longer Ilora wandered, the more she felt as though the library was guiding her, urging her to discover something that had been lost for a long time. It was then that she met an old man, who seemed to materialize out of thin air. He wore a long, flowing robe, and his eyes sparkled with a knowledge that transcended time. His name was Alaric, the keeper of the library, and he had been its guardian for as long as anyone could remember. "You found it," he said, his voice soft yet filled with an undeniable power. "The Library of Forgotten Words." Ilora stared at him, puzzled. "The Library of Forgotten Words? I've never heard of it. How is this possible?" Alaric smiled knowingly. "The library chooses its visitors, just as it chooses its stories. It is not meant to be found by just anyone, but those who seek the truth of the world, those who long to understand the stories that have never been told." Ilora felt a rush of emotions: wonder, confusion, and excitement all at once. She had always wondered why some stories felt unfinished, why certain ideas seemed to float in her mind, never fully formed. It was as though there were gaps in the world's narrative, like pieces of a puzzle scattered across time. Alaric led her to a grand table in the center of the room, upon which lay a single book. Unlike the others, this book was pristine, its cover smooth and blank, devoid of any markings. It seemed to call to her. "This is the book of unwritten stories," Alaric explained. "Every person who has ever lived, every dreamer, every creator, has contributed to it in some way. These are the stories that never made it into the world, ideas abandoned, characters forgotten, or dreams unfulfilled. This book holds them all." Ilora stared at the book, overwhelmed by the weight of its significance. "But why? Why were these stories never told? The world has a way of silencing voices, Alaric replied, his voice heavy with regret. Fears, doubts, and circumstances often keep people from telling their stories. Some are lost in the noise of history, others suppressed by those in power. But here, in this library, every unwritten word, every untold tale is preserved. It waits for someone to give it life again. Ilara's heart beat faster as the implications of Alaric's words sank in. What if she could bring these stories to life? What if, by unlocking the potential of this forgotten library, she could help restore the voices that had been lost to time? With trembling hands, she opened the book. As she did, a warm light filled the room, and the air hummed with an energy that felt almost alive. The pages of the book began to fill with words, sentences, and paragraphs that seemed to flow from nowhere. They spoke of people she had never met, places she had never visited, and adventures that existed only in the deepest corners of her mind. The more Ilara read, the more she felt connected to these stories. It was as if they had always been a part of her, waiting for her to discover them. She began to write, her pen dancing across the pages, breathing life into the characters and worlds that had long been forgotten. Days passed, and Ilara continued to write, her connection to the library deepening. She began to understand its true purpose, not just to preserve forgotten stories, but to inspire new ones. Each unwritten word was a seed, waiting to be planted in the fertile soil of imagination, where it could grow and flourish. And so, the library's secret was no longer a secret. Ilara shared her discovery with the world, inviting others to come and write their own stories, to give voice to the dreams and ideas that had been silenced for far too long. The Library of Forgotten Words became a place of creation, where writers, artists, and dreamers could come together to breathe life into the stories that had never been told. As for Ilara, she became more than just a visitor to the library. She became its guardian, ensuring that the stories of the past, present, and future would always have a place to be heard. The library's doors, once closed to the world, were now open to all who sought to uncover the forgotten words that would shape the future. And so, the unwritten stories lived on, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be told.